Once again, Demon Slayer is proving the haters wrong with another amazing episode that pays off quite literally half a decade of character development, specifically with Rengoku's death.
If you are feeling disheartened, that you are somehow not enough, set your heart ablaze.
So, the episode picks up with, you guessed it, Hashira training, but this time with Gyomei the Stone Hashira. His training is about focusing on the core and the lower body, so Zenitsu and Tanjiro's tasks are to meditate under a waterfall, lift logs, and transport a boulder 1 cho. But 1 cho is apparently an old unit of measuring, and in freedom units is 358 feet, or 109 meters. So I did some researching, and apparently, from some research I did, this system originated from China, and it spread throughout the Sinosphere, which is Japan's traditional measurement system. Established since the Tang Dynasty in 701, Japan still uses this traditional measurement in carpentry, agriculture, and sake serving sizes, which most people have probably seen on sake bottles. Well, I mean, what do I know? I got all this from Wikipedia, but I still, I find these bits of history and culture of the Japanese during the Taisho era so fascinating. It also helps to ground the story in realism even more, even though it's obviously about fighting demons. It still helps out quite a bit. So, Tanjiro puts Zenitsu's dead body in the river after passing out due to a severe case of death, and since the water is really cold, he sees some trainees who are like, hey, the rock is warm, so hold on to it, which Zenitsu does like immediately in one of the most ridiculous ways possible. He then compares it to being held by his mother, which is a thing that happens throughout this episode quite a bit. There's a lot of mentions of mothers, but I don't know. I thought it was pretty funny, but Zenitsu isn't the only one to come down with a case of death. Inosuke, while meditating under the cold waterfall, catches a mild case of it and dies, so Tanjiro has to bring him to life again. Afterwards, the training gets underway, and while under the waterfall, he learns to use ninbutsu, which is a chant during meditation. The term means mindfulness of Buddha, and Namu Amida Butsu, or I call upon measureless Buddha. It's basically an expression of sentiment and a way of opening one's heart to receive. But what would I know? I got all that from Google. Later during the meal, they talk about how when they first met Gyomei, he was this like super imposing guy, which yeah, he's a giant of a man with no pupils and is constantly crying while praying. He seems to be very much like a Buddhist-like figure as well, with this imposing aura due to his insane size. But they get back to Gyomei, which Inosuke says there is zero doubt that he is the strongest of the Hashira, and proceeds to assault Tanjiro, which was really strange. But we also get a neat little character moment for Imosuke. He apparently eats the entire fish, including the bones, because they're tasty and crunchy, which, yeah, you have to probably think back in the Taisho era, grocery stores weren't as abundant as they are now, and processed foods were probably pretty rare on top of that. So I imagine a lot of people back then ate the bones of things like fish as a way to not waste. And as well, the trainees are impressed by Tanjiro's cooking, which shows another trait of Tanjiro. He seems to be a pretty decent cook, which they bring up later in the episode. And this fits his personality. He is a very warm person, and warm people usually have pretty warmly made food, at least from my experience. Most likely something he inherited from his mother, of course. We then go through this humorous training with Tanjiro and Zenitsu, which, I do have to admit, Zenitsu hasn't annoyed me much since season 1, but this episode really cranked up the Zenitsu annoying levels for me, so I didn't think that was a very good part of the episode. In fact, that's probably my only criticism of the entire season so far. But we get to see our new upper moon for the season, which is a lady with one eye playing a shamisen, Nakime. They are up to no good as they are following the other trainee guys from a couple episodes ago, and the Demon Slayer Corps is right. Muzan is trying to find Nezuko and Ubayashiki. This adds a lot of stakes to this season and the story, obviously, which also makes me wonder if they'll have Muzan kill Ubayashiki and kidnap Nezuko. It would also be pretty emotional if they kill off Ubayashiki as well. But let's talk about some discounts. Use code CTACTICS to get 10% off your order of gamer subs. I recommend the Cursed Energy flavor. That's my favorite one, along with mango, of course. So thank you for partnering with me, gamer subs, and enjoy your discount. Tanjiro tried to push the boulder, breaks his seta, or known as his sandal, and I love the parallel between slicing a boulder in half in season 1, which he did for the initial training to become a demon slayer, and now having to push a boulder in the Hashira training arc. It's really interesting. So he goes back to repair the seta and runs into trainees who are leaving the training to instead act as support for the Corps, which I actually like that. Tanjiro didn't guilt them or impose his own ideals upon them. He was simply understanding and allowed allowed them to do it. After all, they'll be going to a supporting role, which, as Tanjiro points out, is just as important as those in the role who fight. The trainees are then fed by Tanjiro, showing once again how great his cooking is. He's sort of like Shiro Emiya, out here being a 5-star chef, and Tanjiro brings up his experience being a charcoal burner, so he knows all about finding the right kind of heat for what he's doing. And he's able to channel through this moment, a bit of his old family and a bit of that old atmosphere, which was really nice because it was juxtaposed between Tanjiro's training, which frames this as pretty integral to his character, as if he loses or gives up, then how many other families could fall to the demons? What would his family think about him? And also as a way to show how far he's come. But we see a resolution to Ginya's moment with Saname in the last episode. He thanks Tanjiro for his help after he comes by, and it seems that the two finally come to some sort of common ground and they're more nice to each other. They also discuss their training, which, like Gyomei, involves using ninbutsu. And there's this, I think it's a joke. I don't know if this translates well for me. I don't know if I was just misunderstanding, but Ginya says Gyomei says Namu Namu, which Gyomei seems to not sit right with him, or was they just showing him saying Namu? It also, I think, implied that Gyomei was listening to their conversation in the forest. I could have, taken in that scene wrong. But at the end, when Ginya leaves, he tells Tanjiro to not overdo it, but says to himself, not that he's the kind of guy who'd listen anyways. And as we've seen throughout Demon Slayer, Tanjiro can be quite stubborn, which actually isn't something they shove in your face. So initially, when I watched this, I felt that he wasn't saying something that was true, but it is true. It's subtle, or at least it's not as obvious, because Tanjiro really doesn't like to give up or give in. And it's subtle because he doesn't say it or has lines of dialogue or scenes where it's spoon-fed to the viewer. It's usually shown through, like, for example, Tanjiro trying to push this boulder to the point his setup breaks and needs to get it repaired. It's a pretty clever way of doing it, and also not having multiple scenes of Tanjiro repeatedly over and over telling the viewer how important everything is to him. So Tanjiro employs using repetitive motion to try and move the boulder, and it's cut short as the trainees want to eat. So at dinner that night, Ginya comes by and explains that using repetitive motion is about building up emotion, which Tanjiro realizes is quite different from total concentration. So from my understanding, this is just what I think it is. Total concentration is more about calming down the body to focus, and repetitive motion seems to be about focusing a wide array of emotions and channeling through that. One is about being calm and the other is about being emotional, and through both of those, they are able to concentrate. So they talk about when does Tanjiro get emotional, and he has to think about it, but pauses, and you don't really need to know what he gets emotional about. They don't have to tell you at all, because Tanjiro is a pretty simple character as is. You can guess and read him pretty easily. It's about his family, Nezuko, his friends, Rengoku. And speaking of, he goes back to the boulder, and I love this season. Once again, I love it so much because Tanjiro channels the phrase Rengoku told him in Mugen Train, set your heart ablaze, which I'm telling you all right now. Please watch my breakdown of that scene I did a couple weeks ago. It'll help you understand this season so much better. It got pretty much no views, so go out, support it, share it around with friends or forums, Reddit, whatever. It's a really good video. But as soon as he thinks of those two things, he then is able to start moving the boulder, and the mark on his head changes form as he begins to start pouring sweat like a waterfall. Eventually, he is able to start moving the boulder in this really amazing scene that we don't really realize it, but pays off years of building up the story, which specifically Episode 1 and Mugen Train are both highly important moments that help build to this moment. And finally, we have a full payoff of those moments. Most importantly, the payoff of Rengoku's death. This is what his death meant to the series and his legacy. His final words allow Tanjiro to unlock his inner strength and push past his limits to set a higher bar. Set Your Heart Ablaze wasn't just a great speech, it was a great speech that led to this moment, that built for years, that now leads to the final arc of the story. And it made me realize that Rengoku is quite possibly one of the single most important characters of the series for this very reason. And at the end of the episode, Muzan continues to plot against Uba Ishiki, so we'll have to see where that goes in the next episode. Otherwise, this episode was really phenomenal, and I'll say it once, I'll say it again, I'll say it however many times it needs to be said, this is one of, if not the best seasons of Demon Slayer. The fact that it's getting hate is ridiculous, and it shows there are people out there who hate good storytelling and only want mindless action. Which is funny, because the criticism against the series right now is that it's carried by animation, which obviously is simply not true. So when people finally get what they want, which is a season with less action and more story focus, people are now shitting on it for being more story focused and less action. It shows that these people don't know what they want and are hypocritical and inconsistent with their criticisms, at the least. But either way, mini rant over. Let me know in the comments what you thought about this episode, and please check out these videos here. They're pretty good, and I made them just for you, Jessica. Thanks for watching. Bye-bye.